have my hello everyone. You're all very welcome to Postmarked, exploring the Flea Market Love Letters archive. My name is Liz Maguire. I am the creator and curator of Flea Market Love Letters, and I'm delighted to be joined here this evening by so many friends and new faces, but also to be here on YouTube or being shared with our new readers or people who are discovering the project or maybe weren't able to join us this evening specifically. But you're very, very welcome. And it's a pleasure to be here this evening talking about mail with you. As I said, my name is Liz Maguire, and I am a ardent letter lover. I am an amateur preservationist. So what that means is that about 10 years ago, I collected my first series of letters, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. And I haven't stopped since. So there was a bit of a dry period there in the middle when I went to college, and I didn't have the space. But now I am very happy to say that 9 years on, since starting Flea Market Love Letters, I just recently moved house, and so I've got a lovely new wardrobe. It's the first time in all the years of flea market where everything's been all in one place. So sometimes I just open the cabinets and see everybody all in the press, and it's just wonderful to see sort of the many stories and legacies that are just behind me here, not behind this early 19th century calligraphy, but more in the room behind me. I am a huge advocate for handwritten letters. Some of you on the call are pen pals of mine, have been pen pals of mine, and maybe pen pals of each other or letter writers yourselves, writing friends, family. You might be participating in post crossing, whatever your fancy. Chances are, if you're interested in antique letters, you might have an affinity for the contemporary letter as well, which is fantastic. So you're all very welcome here. During COVID, at one point, I had 88 pen pals. And I didn't write to all of them back and forth. Sometimes it was just someone sending me a letter. I was part of the Twitter project Penpalooza. And during the height of COVID, when we were all locked indoors, I remember the postman was walking down my street, and you'll see there I have Write More Letters as a project that I do. It's a design my husband did almost 5, 6 years ago now, I think. But I had this Write More Letters t-shirt on, and I was so excited for the postman because I was like, he comes to the door every day, and now I have this Write More Letters t-shirt on. Surely he's going to celebrate the handwritten letter with me. Instead, he did notice the shirt, and he did tell me that I received the most post of the houses in that estate, and that was the extent of our jubilation. But it was certainly very exciting for me, and anybody who loves letters will know. And you'll be happy to know that now that we've moved, I have already befriended the postman here, and he honks and waves at me when he drives past me elsewhere in the neighborhood. So the power of the handwritten letter. But yeah, so I write a lot of letters myself. I had 88 pen pals during COVID. That number has dropped off now. But I'm delighted to see and support anybody who's writing letters or collecting or interested in letters. I'm a postal museum buff. That's just a little fun thing to throw out there. It's really amazing, I think, kind of the history that Post can tell us. You'll hear this evening about different stories within letters, but I can go as far as to tell you that the envelopes and the paper choice and the type of pen and the handwriting all means different things. And it's very exciting to be among friends this evening who are interested to learn a little bit about that conveniently from the comfort of home. No need to travel to Germany or France or the UK for this, but I have, and I love going to postal museums. I also love hunting out post boxes when I'm traveling. That's a really fun one for me, and it's actually quite funny because in different countries, the post boxes obviously are different colors. So I find when I get back from a trip, I'll get very excited about seeing that color when I'm back home. But in most instances, or vice versa, it's just a bin. So that takes a little bit of conditioning to not whip out my phone to take a picture of a bin. But I take photos of post boxes. Maybe other people take photos of bins. Who knows? But that's just a little bit about me and why I enjoy writing letters. And now we'll get to the archive and why I do what I do. So, Flea Market Love Letters is an archive of real letters written by real people who were living history as it was happening, as we all are. When I started this project in 2017, it was because I was sitting in my apartment in Washington, D.C., and I was I was getting some work done on the apartment. There was a tradesman there, and he was saying, oh, well, they repaired this, that, or the other after the fire. And I thought, no one mentioned a fire, so he left, and I Googled the address, and sure enough, we were renting, and in the year or two before, there had been a fire in the apartment, which is a bit spooky to kind of learn about. No one was hurt, but it cast the mind in a direction. And I started thinking, well, the classic question, what would you grab if there was a fire now? And the first thing that came to mind were my letters. So I had started collecting way, way back in about 2009, 2010, and started buying letters in small bundles from different places. And that was in 2017. I had them in the apartment with me in DC, and I thought, well, I'd grab the letters. And in that context, I suddenly felt very, very guilty that I was the only person who had these letters. So I started to photograph them, and I started to post them on Instagram. So for about 4 years, there was about 70 people who knew about Flea Market. It was me, my mom, and three of my mom's friends, basically. And I just loved it. So what I would do is I would take photographs of the envelopes, I would type up the letters, and I knew no one was reading it. It was just me reading the letters, but I loved it because it was just this place to feature these amazing little pieces of history. So during COVID, then I was invited to participate in several podcasts, one of them being What Should I Read Next? And that was a really big day for the podcast. When that episode came out, that was a big day for the project because it was a great readership, listeners of readers, not readership, a great collection of listeners who really the episode resonated with and who joined me on the flea market page. So since 2017, we've been growing steadily, and it's a really wonderful community. If you're not a part of Flea Market Love Letters already, congratulations, you are because you're here. It's a really gentle space. It's just somewhere where you're invited to come and appreciate the handwritten letter, as I have for almost a decade now. But what I started doing about 2 or 3 years ago was I started trying to put some shape on the project and thinking about eventually writing a book or doing a project around the archive. And in doing that, I realized that one of the things that I connected with so much was the fact that the letters are, in their context, they are unprecedented times. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with the idea that we are once again living through unprecedented times for the 10th, 15th time for many of us. It started to really resonate with me, particularly after COVID and kind of in the last 2 or 3 years. The idea that World War II, the Great Depression, Queen Elizabeth's coronation, all of these things which we look back on and think of as history, were actually just day-to-day things for people. And so that was really when the archive started to take a different direction for me because it stopped being sort of the romanticization. It's still very romantic. There's still a lot of appreciation, but I then started to think of it more as a social history project. So in that concept, it gave me a bit of hope, and I hope that it might share that with you as well, that unprecedented times have happened before. We have survived them. The letters have told me in 10 years that history repeats itself in good and bad and beautiful and ugly ways. And the letters have taught me, and I hope the readers who engage with the project, the power of recording and reflecting. And so that's what we're going to be doing together this evening. I was collecting my first letters in 2009, established the archive in 2017 when I was living in DC. Since then, I've collected over 3,000 letters to the archive through my own hunting at flea markets and online auctions, through gifts. I've had several friends and family gift me letters for birthdays, for Christmases, all that sort of wonderful stuff. So I've really appreciated that, and the archive would not be the size that it is without the support of friends and family who contribute. I do not accept, generally, I have a rule that I don't accept letters from folks who are in the community of Flea Market Love Letters, specifically because letters are an incredibly sentimental thing. So I've only accepted letters, I've accepted a collection of postcards, and I know I've accepted one individual letter and one series of letters who were from individuals who I can say both of the series of letters and the individual letter were both rescued from trash that wasn't their trash. So that's kind of the only stories I have of letters that I didn't acquire personally. If you have a collection of letters and you'd like to know what to do with your own family letters, or perhaps you have a collection from your own flea market or an antique store or a hand-me-down or something like that, there are a lot of really great resources out there about how to archive. The Postal Museum in the UK, the Smithsonian in DC all have a lot of great tips about how to preserve the paper. Unfortunately, places like those postal museums don't have the resources to receive letter donations. So if you have a collection of letters that you want to make sure is looked after, and you no longer, I call myself the guardian. You no longer want to be the guardian of those letters. I recommend involving local community groups or local historical societies. Even local libraries can sometimes be interested in smaller collections, more specific to the area. So if you are someone who collects letters yourself, postcards, photographs, anything like that, and you'd like to do something like this with them, you're more than welcome to start sharing on Instagram and building a community where the water's very warm. But if you would like to do something physically with the letters, I recommend reaching out to local historical societies and libraries about preservation methods. So the archive itself, about 3,000 letters, about 35 different series, give or take, that have been published. A series is a collection of letters that is either written to one individual, written by one individual, or written to an individual by a number of people, or it's a number of individuals with the same surname that received letters to a similar address. So they're basically collections. So we have about 35, 40 different collections, including quite a large miscellaneous collection, which are single issue letters. So these stats are from sort of the broad scope of that 3,000 number. So over from the 1910s to the 1950s, we've got about 19%, so 18.5 from the 1910s and the 1920s. We've got 15% from the 1930s. We see a huge spike in the 1940s with almost 46% of the collection being from then, and the 1950s is very, very small. So sometimes I get asked, what's the oldest letter that I have? I do have letters from the 1860s, but then again, kind of the newest letter that I have is probably from the early 60s. And I am more reluctant to include those in the archive at the time being because they are a little bit more contemporary. And I haven't said this yet, but I will say it that these are real people's letters, these are real people's stories. So I just like to make sure that where possible, they're handled delicately and that uh, where possible, their privacy is as respected as possible. So a letter from the 1910s is a little bit more permissible, I think, than something from the 1960s or 70s. So yes, we have a very, very small collection in the 1950s onwards, but for the time being, the last 10 years or so, I focused on the 1910s to about the 1940s. So, letters in social history, that's what I was talking about, the idea that they are examples of unprecedented times that have become historical events, which we are all living through, it seems like, on the daily now. So we're going to look at two different collections. We're going to look at the Ahern letters, which are from the 1940s, and we're going to start with these. So these letters are from Bill Ahern, 40 letters written between 43 to 45 to his parents in New Jersey. He is an American GI who is based abroad. You'll notice that between 43 and 45, something pretty significant happens, which is the end of the war. And most people think in World War II letters that it's a bit like the Notebook. The reality is that World War II letters, while I'll talk about examples this evening that are very powerful and very significant, a lot of them end up being, particularly after the war is ended, they end up being quite dry because it's generally soldiers who have been away for 2 or 3 years and they're sort of waiting for orders that they can go home, and they might be frustrated or they might be terribly, terribly homesick. And some of the letters can be very, amazing and these wonderful snapshots of history, but there are also everyday notes as well mixed in there. So the Ahern letters, if you have yet to read a collection of letters from Flea Market Love Letters, the Ahern letters are one that's close to my heart. I probably started transcribing them, which means photographing, typing, and publishing the letters in 2018, I want to say, was when I shared the Ahern letters. And these letters come up to me a lot of the times. As I said, I'm very sort of familiar with the different topics and things. And if you're following the Flea Market Love Letter social media page, you'll see that this year what I'm trying to do is, because we're almost a decade, I'm trying to bring, rather than worried about putting new letters in front of you, I'm trying to talk about the letters that we've featured almost over 10 years. And one of those collections being the Ahern letters. I shared recently, at the start of this week, I shared a letter from Bill Ahern in Nuremberg, because I watched the film Nuremberg, which if you haven't seen yet, and you're interested in World War II, I thought it was very striking. I also watched the film Lee. this week, which is about Lee Miller. And that'll kind of influence, you'll see where I was influenced in my two selections this evening. One, we have a quantity of World War II, even though my preference is probably the 1920s. We have a quantity of World War II letters, but also just this week alone, I had watched Nuremberg and Lee, which both kind of colored the letter selections that I have for us tonight. But in the Ahern letter that I shared on our social media, he talked about Nuremberg being there, going to the stadium, Hitler Stadium, watching an American baseball game there, walking past the trial where Goering was being, condemned. It's just a very real example of what we see as these historical moments. And I'd always sort of known that that the Ahern letters were unusual because uh, of his positioning at the time in the war. He wasn't able to say where he was, but when the war was over, he was able to talk a little bit more about where he had been. And it's not, I don't have a quote from it in this presentation this evening, but there's also a quote in one of his later letters just before the series ends. I don't know when he went home, but the series ends around the mid to 1945. And he just talks about how he's going to fill his parents in when he gets home because there was so much that he couldn't put in through the censors. The Ahern letters, I don't have any favorites, but the Ahern letters are a really um, succinct capture of what World War II must have been like for Bill, and it's a privilege and a pleasure to share them with you on the website and to have shared them before and to talk about them this evening. Tonight, the letter that I want to talk about predates Nuremberg. So Nuremberg is that 1945 window. This is 1944. This is Christmas night. You will realize that on his envelope, he has his army address. He has that the letter has come from the postmark, that circle there. We'll get to this in a moment, towards the latter half of the presentation. That postmark tells us that it's the U.S. Army Postal Service. So, and that little purple stamp on the side says that it was approved by censor. So the reason I want to highlight that for you is the fact that nowhere in this letter does he say his location in the general adjustment or the general advertisement of where the letter is. But he does allude to where he is quite specifically in his language, and obviously the censor was happy enough with that. He's in France in 1944. Paris is liberated in 1944. Paris is liberated. The rest of France follows in pockets. The understanding is that the Ahern letters, he's not in Paris. He might be more further out into the countryside. And the reason that I chose this letter is because there's just very powerful real world imagery that I want to share with you. So I've got two quotes, and there's never an elegant way to do this. So what I do is I share the quote, and then I read it out for you. But you have the quote there, and the collection of the letters are on the site if you'd like to read more in full. But just for a taste for you this evening, in 1944 in December, he says, this is to his mom. He says, "Dear Mom," this is from a section later in the letter. He says, "The sun was shining brightly on the tree this morning as I walked to Saul room. That was the bright room, so we put it there. Then we walked down to breakfast. We passed the people of the town in their finest. More had their everyday wooden shoes on or apron. All were dressed in their 1939 finest. A few wished us Bon Noel, good Christmas, but most seemed only intent on getting to church where they would really pray for a good Christmas next year." So it's just unreal, like the emotion that he's capturing, and he's not a Hemingway, he's not Fitzgerald. He's a guy from New Jersey who's just experienced the war, and he's putting down what's in front of him, and it's really powerful, I think, at least. He says some of the houses had trees in their windows that looked very much like our own, all with the shining sent over not by Santa, but dropped by German planes to send U.S. raids off its courses. It made good tinsel and shined bright, so I guess the people here see no reason not to use it. So the line about them being in their 1939 finest in 1944, of course, that being when Hitler came to power in 39. The idea of the silver to deflect the planes being shredded up and used as Christmas tree tinsel. It's the stuff of it evaporates in history, right? Because they're little details that until we see these letters, we don't know that these things happened. We can hypothesize them, we can see them presented in films, but oftentimes you watch a film and you might think, oh, that seems very, you know, did that really happen? Was that really the way it was? And the letters do a lot to tell us what it was really like. And that's why, as a primary source, it's so special to me to have the archive, to have the size that I have it, and to be responsible for it, because it is a very special thing to have 3,000 pieces of real history. So the other letter series we're going to look at this evening are the Loudon letters. So it is, for anybody who's keeping track, International Women's Day was on Sunday, March 8th. The Loudon letters, I have quite a few girlfriends that I love in Flea Market Love Letters. Vera and Jane are a pair of them. They're a pair of sisters. And the Loudon letters, I think just because, if I'm being honest, I watched Lee the other night and that was such an incredible story about a woman in wartime. And I just thought, let's marry Bill Ahern's experience with a woman in wartime. What can I do here? And I decided to talk to you this evening about the Loudon letters. So you'll see from this envelope that this was sent to Virginia, in Newport New, to a woman named Vera Loudon. Vera was quite an interesting character. There's only 4 letters in this series. That's what I mean. It could be 1 letter. It could be, well, miscellaneous is 1 letter, but anything more than 2 letters, it can have a series. This is a very, very small series. 4 letters, 3 postcards. It takes about a week to share it every day on social media. It's a blip, which is why in 2026, I'm trying to focus on going back to more of what I've shared before so that everybody can get familiar with what's already in the archive rather than feeling like I have to get through 3,000 letters. We can appreciate the significance of what's in front of us, and the Loudon letters being one of those. So Jean Loudon was a member of something called UNRWA. So UNRWA, for those of you who aren't familiar, was the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. So UNRWA was a post-war initiative, which was basically, it was 44 different nations came together and said that they had to do something to help those who were affected by displacement due to the war. So UNRWA was, they provided food, they provided very simple creature comforts, cigarettes, nylons, things like that. But the very interesting thing about UNRWA, and this is why I wanted to include, one, Jean's story is very interesting, but two, why I wanted to talk to you about UNRWA, is that a significant number were female volunteers. So this was post-war. So they'd done their job. They'd done the rations at home. They'd done all that sort of stuff, writing the letters to fathers, husbands, brothers, morale. Yes, there were women in the services. We have letters from those as well, from women who, I have a very particular letter from a woman who served in WAVES, which was the women's equivalent of the U.S. Army or the U.S. Navy. But UNRWA was a particular interesting piece that I learned about in archiving Jean's letters. I had no idea that it existed. When we engage with a lot of history around World War II, we see a lot of the immediacy of perhaps the horrors of the camps being liberated, and then it cuts to 10 years later, 15 years later, 50 years later. But this was months later. So, in response to the horrors and atrocities, UNRWA were volunteers who went and moved to post-war communities and looked after the people who were so severely displaced. So, there's 2 letters that I want to talk about tonight. Excuse me. This letter from February 1945. You'll see at the very top, it's addressed Dear Sister of Tijin. T''Jin. When I was first archiving these letters, I thought, what's going on here? This was sent to Virginia. What's going on? It's someone who I believe is Dutch, and English is a second language. So you can tell a lot of this through the sentence structure, through the word choice. But that Tijin is a giveaway. And I've had someone on a previous presentation or who's engaged with the letters before who's been able to explain to me that as far as I understand, that Tijin, T'Jin, is the letter writer attempting to say of Jean. So what's actually happening is the letters are addressed to Vera Loudon, who is Jean's sister. So Jean is a volunteer in UNRWA while she is in wherever, Poland, Holland, wherever she is. People who have been touched and affected by her volunteer work are writing to her through her sister in Virginia. So the 4 letters that we have are to Vera Loudon, but they are of Jean. So they're letters to Jean through her sister. So this letter from February 1945 says, "We promised to Jin to write you a letter, and I do it with pleasure. The first time we saw Jin in the UNRWA camp in Nijmegen, she has often been in our home, and it was very sociable to be with her. We got a packet with dresses from her. It was very nice because we did not get anything when the German were here. We are very thankful. We have been gone out with her too to the motor races. It was very nice, and every evening we went with her for a walk. Tijin told us when she moved, she would go to Germany. Have you already got her address? Have not you? Will you send it us? Then we can write her a letter." So, this is very affecting, I think, whether you're hearing me read it to you, you're reading it yourself, or you're seeing the handwritten letter. It's incredible, the stories that are in the archive. And this is Unra and Jean's story, and the stories of the people who were displaced and were so affected, and the simplicity of the fact that they just wanted to connect with this woman who was kind to them, and who meant so much to them at such a difficult time, I think really captures what the handwritten letter is now for so many and what it was during our unprecedented times of COVID and etc. And that's why it's important to me to kind of emphasize the fact that these are real letters, sometimes 100+ years old, but they are as real as if you're sitting and talking to someone across from you. So this letter is from February 45. This is another photograph of women volunteers leaving for UNRWA. Important thing to note, these volunteers are disembarking from Newport News, Virginia. That's where they are heading off on their ships to go to post-war Europe. The letters that they're sending are addressed to Vera in Newport News, Virginia. So it's quite clear that that's where they're getting their address and their information from, in the hopes that while Jean is traveling, they can connect with her through her sister, via the UNRWA organization. So brave ladies, love them. Don't know any of them, love them. This is the last letter that we're going to look at closely this evening, which is an October 45 letter, again written to Jean, this time by a different individual. And this says, "You will wonder to get a letter from a Dutch girl, but I have promised it to Tijin, and I like it very much. Do you know where Tijin is in Germany now? Will you write it me? Then I will write her a letter too. Since she left us, we did not hear anything from her. We like Tijin very much. We often went out with her. We have been to the motor races, and every evening we went for a walk with her. I will you how we became friends with Tijin. We went to school, and suddenly a girl came to us and walked with us to the building. I got a very nice souvenir from her. After that time, we saw her every evening. Before Tijin came, we have had more than 55 Canadian soldiers. They have been with us the whole winter. Now I finish with the best greetings." It's incredible. Just the simplicity of the language, the facts, the delivery, the reality, in the brevity, I think is just it's an unreal story. And the UNRWA and the Loudon letters are one of my favorites. I know I say I don't have favorites. Spoiler alert, they're all my favorites, because they're all so wonderful. This is Jean, Helena Jean Loudon. There you have, on the right-hand side. As I was putting this together, I've used this photo before. I actually discovered that Jean's signed this yearbook photo. I found it on Ancestry years ago. So not only do we have a photo of Jean, we actually have her handwriting and her signature, which, if you're a nerd like me, is pretty cool. But in her high school yearbook, they put quotes for everybody, and Jean's quote was, "Jean's smiling face and laughing eyes are not an adequate disguise for the serious thoughts which pass through her head, but they'll always stand her in good stead." So when you think of that as an 18-year-old, just attributed that sort of old spirit, through that little few lines in a high school yearbook. And then we know her story of going to volunteer with UNRWA, of the unspoken kindnesses that she showered on people during such a horrific time. We then have her obituary. She lived a very interesting life. She was all over the place. But the piece I think that's captured quite nicely is this line I've pulled out. "At an early age, Jean left her Pennsylvania farm where she grew up and traveled to Puerto Rico. There, she talked her way into a civilian job with the military. At the end of World War II, her job sent her to Germany to help repatriate refugees." So many of us discover family histories having to do with the wars long after the individual has passed. simply because it might not be something that that individual felt comfortable talking about, or it might be something that they weren't able to talk about. We think of Bletchley being a great example of this. And so if I were to give you any advice as we wrap up and head into our evening, we'll take a little bit look at a few more envelopes, but the advice would be to read closely, to think curiously, to think about what isn't being said and what is being said, and to just understand that in this age of texting and typing and sort of self-authorship, we do a lot of self-editing. We write something in an email, we read it back, and we think, oh, I'm going to change this or I'm going to change that. That doesn't sound right. I'm coming off too pushy or I'm not being direct enough. When you have a pen and paper, very rarely are you going to get to the bottom of a letter and scrap it. You've already written the page of the letter. I know examples from Flea Market Love Letters where the start of a letter is hot and bothered and angry about something, and by the end, they've gotten to the letter and they have apologized for how angry they were when they started. So when we think about everything that we don't know about history and we read these letters, we also have to understand that there was very little self-censorship. And so you can read a lot into what's said and what's not said, which is one of the things that I really love about the project. So, as promised, this session was called Postmarked. So, leaving you with a little bit of nerdiness for your evening, you can walk away with some facts here. So, postmarks are the circular sign, the circular stamp on your envelope. They tell us where the letters were processed. And cancellation stamps, or quote unquote killers, ensure that stamps are not reused, but they sometimes serve as messaging or marketing space on letters. So 3,000 letters, I've probably got 2,800 envelopes to go with them. I've seen a lot of postmarks, I've seen a lot of killers, and I pulled a few out for us to look at this evening. This is from the 1920s. This is the Kluppelberg letters. If you've been to one of my evenings before, you know Kluppelbergs are right up there with everybody. Fascinating series, all the letters available on the website, but really fascinating 1920s series. These are the postmark tells you it's from Washington, D.C., 1922. And the killer, which is stamped over the upside down George Washington, tells us to remember to address your street because as urbanization and city growth was expanding, they didn't yet have zip codes. So zip codes didn't come, this is a US letter, zip codes didn't come into the US until the 1960s. So as more and more people were moving into the cities, they were having to figure out how to specify specific addresses. So this is an example of a killer, a postmark, a cancellation stamp being used as a piece of PSA, basically, reminding people that if they want their letters to get to the person it's intended to, they need to specifically say the street and number and not just send to Liz Maguire on Laurel Street. It's more specific than that, and it's a fascinating example into the boom of urbanization in the 1920s, as well as the history of the US postal system. This is a letter from the 1940s. You can see there, this is a beautiful letter. I have a number of these that were actually never sent. They were just the sort of stationery. That's something I've been meaning to get up onto the archive. Might do that this year. I've quickly realized with Flea Market Love Letters, I don't promise in terms of weeks or months. It tends to be years, and at this stage, possibly next decade. But it's a beautiful example of essentially propaganda, but morale elevating stationery, which was available to citizens in the home front writing to U.S. soldiers. So the reason I chose this one is because of the cancellation stamp that says "Give Red Cross War Fund." The war bonds or funds were a huge support of the war effort in World War II, and you can see that this would have been not just used on mail, which was going to active servicemen and women. It was also used in mail, which was sent between everybody. So if you're sending a letter to somebody who's in the war, great. They're not going to really care about a war bond, but because they universalized the war bond stamp, if I was writing my next door neighbor a letter, I would get it. And I work in marketing now. The concept is pretty simple. Repetition is a big piece of that. Community spirit is a big piece of that as well. And we see the myth and the legend that the handwritten letter is dying today. I don't believe that it is. I don't believe the letter is dying. I think that numbers are down. But as you saw from the percentage, from the nearly 46% of letters we have from the 1940s in the archive, it was a huge method of communication. So being able to put any kind of messaging, whether it was PSA or advertising on the envelopes would have been a real way to connect with your audience. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to pull some of the different killers from the collection to just show you the different types of messaging that even the envelopes can tell us. And finally, I love this one. I've talked about Nuremberg, the film. I've talked about Lee, the film. Anybody who loves handwritten letters, you've probably read or seen the Guernsey Potato Peel Society. I'm such a nerd that when I saw this in the movie, I took a screenshot because I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, I have an envelope that says that. This is 1946. It's post-war. It says, "Don't waste bread, others need it." And it was used as a prop letter in the film. So I think it's really interesting to see how history affects how we teach and the media that we consume and the little details. And I'm absolutely always looking out for post boxes in films. It's one of my, I love to find them when I'm traveling. I love to find them when I'm not traveling, when I'm traveling from my couch. I'm always looking out for letters. I love books about letters. I love films, music, anything where letters are mentioned is a really special place for me. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about letters yourself, these are three wonderful books. Who's Got Mail by Linda Barrett Osborne is a really approachable, comprehensive, and non-threatening textbook about the history of mail in America. I listened to it as an audiobook. It was fantastic. It was like a podcast. Every chapter was just a different piece. You would be surprised how many different types of celebrities were mail carriers. That was a little fun fact for you. There's quite a few celebrities who started out their careers working for the postal system. Learned that from Who's Got Mail, as well as History of Stamps, as well as History of Post Offices, and etc. Marcel's Letters by Caroline Porter is a beautiful, beautiful book about a woman who bought a number of letters from an antique store. She's a graphic designer and she created a font from Marcel's font. And she specifically asks the ending of the letter to the ending of the book to not be discussed. It's very, very powerful. It's a really beautiful book, very powerful story. And I loved it so much I used that font on my wedding invitations. So there's mail everywhere in my life. And the third book I recommend is Anna Quinlan's Write for Your Life. Flea Market Love Letters is actually featured in this book, so really appreciate Anna doing that. This book came out during and around COVID, talking about the importance of writing uh, across all different types. She interviews doctors. She talks about the archive, some of our earliest letters that we shared, and different types of outlets that writing provides. Another book that isn't here, but which I will hold up now, is having to do with, I lost my clicker, From Me to You. So From Me to You, this is the book From Me to You. It's written by Brian Greenlee and Allison Hitchcock. This is the story of Brian and Allison and the charity that they started, From Me to You. It's an absolutely amazing organization. I write for it every week. I am a huge supporter. Anybody who writes letters and who wants to write more of them, but can't, it's a sad reality. Sometimes you want to write more letters, but you can't think of anyone to write to. From Me to You is a wonderful place to donate your letters. They accept donated letters and match them with individuals experiencing cancer. Really, really amazing stuff. And if at all possible, when you're making a donation of a letter, if you could make a small donation, cost of a cup of coffee covers stamps for them to help match your letters with individuals in hospitals, hospices, or at home experiencing cancer. So it's a really wonderful organization. I'm really honored to be a volunteer and to get to talk about the work that they do and include it in the flea market community because it is very, very important. Finally, the Write More Letters Project. You saw my t-shirt there. I donate 100% of the proceeds from any t-shirts, mugs, anything like that that you can buy on the website, on the flea market website that say Write More Letters. I have some stickers. If anybody would like some stickers for a $5 donation to the charity Hope for the Warriors, I'll send you 3 stickers. So if you would like that, you can just send me an email. We can organize that. But I have, believe me, plenty of stickers. So the more donations, the better. But those are 2 different ways that you can bring the spirit of Flea Market Love Letters with you into the rest of your evening and hopefully your week and your month and your year ahead. Thank you so, so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for sitting with me as I talk about my favorite thing, mail. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so, so much. If you have any questions, I will stop the recording here, but if you want to go off and get ready for the rest of your evening, I absolutely understand. But thank you so, so much for spending the time with me. And as ever, happy writing letters. Liz. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was so lovely.
Thank you, and thank you so much for joining. It's I never really know where I should talk about this, so I threw it up on LinkedIn the other day, and obviously there are folks who are into letters. Liz was great, Noreen was there, yourself was there. It's really, really special to find letter lovers all over the place, even on LinkedIn. Oh my goodness. So yeah, so if anybody wants to know about any of the topics that I covered this evening, this will be up on YouTube tomorrow. I send a once a month newsletter from the Flea Market newsletter. You can sign up for that through the website. Or if you have any questions, you can email me. It's just info@fleamarketloveletters.com. But yeah, if I don't see you again soon, it's been a pleasure spending the evening with you. And please always feel free to shoot me a message or write me a letter.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Have a good evening.
You
Rebecca,
too.
yes, I remember. I remember I saw your name on the Eventbrite. I would love actually, Rebecca, if you can send me an email at info@fleamarketloveletters. I would love
Great.
to uh
Sounds good. Would love to. I mean, I'm not really a letter writer at the minute, but I used to do quite a lot when I was younger. I think I've lost touch. And when you put this on LinkedIn, I was like, wow, this is so cool. I wanted to just find out what it's all about and,
course.
history and the letter writing.
Lakshmi,
It's really interesting.
I think if you want to get back into letter writing, you should absolutely check out From Me to You.
Right?
We've
Okay.
just Liz Kentish is on the board of From Me to You. She was just there with us this evening.
Right?
They are a great organization. It's a great way to practice your letter writing and practice your the habit of building it up. I write 3 letters a week. It's
Right.
a big piece for
Wow.
mental health, but it's
Right.
it's it's really a valuable organization. So my next step for you would be probably to look at From Me to You.
Sounds good. I'll do that. Yep, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
All right, take care. See you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
You
Thank
too.
you,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Perfect.